Hello, my friends. This is Lynda Lippin, and welcome to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Hello, my friends. It's Lynda here, your host for the Pilates Goddess podcast. Welcome back once again. I'm so thrilled to be here with you in this new year. Today, I just wanted to start off by thanking everybody who has left a rating or review on the Apple Podcast app. And I thought that I would share a few of the reviews that are already there. So thank you, Anna Pereira, for Lynda is a great teacher with great stories and years of experience. Gentle, expert, informative, articulate, and fun to listen to. Thank you, Lynda, for being the Pilates goddess you are. And thank you, Anna, for listening and leaving that lovely review. My next review is from M&M895. Thank you for such a straightforward and honest approach about where Pilates is today. You gave us a brief history and examples leading up to what it is happening right now. Great job. Then I have one from B. Shapiro. Lynda is able to explain complex ideas so everyone can benefit. Thank you so much. Sunny Almond, who you know is a guest. So if you go back into the podcast episodes, you can listen to her interview, which is full of great information. I love the fact that Lynda's conversations are just that, unrehearsed and as they happen. It's true, guys. I don't even do a lot of editing, frankly. All sides encouraged to speak their truth. Then we have Otter, the hecking good pup. I love this podcast. Appropriate for both teachers and practitioners. Her information is insightful and science-based. Nice chunks to think about, but not too long that it gets lost within a ton of dialogue. I really appreciate Lynda and all her experience. And then finally, from Many Paths Pilates, I've been a Pilates teacher for over 34 years. Welcome to the club. These days, I do a lot of teaching over Zoom, which I like, but I do miss the pleasure of talking and interacting with my colleagues, and I get to experience that in this podcast. Now, I do have at least one or two one-star reviews, but those folks elected to not actually leave a written review. And I really wish they had, so I would know what it is that they really didn't like about the podcast. But I'm going to go with the 6 5-star reviews. And those are the ones I read to you today. Guys, if you're doing any work that is important, any work that is somewhat contentious, chances are you're going to get some bad reviews. I was actually thrilled to get some one-star reviews to balance out all my 5-star reviews. But again, I would love to know why. So if for some reason you're still listening to the podcast, but you left a 1-star review, or 1-star rating, I would love it if you would actually go back into Apple Podcasts and expand with a written review and let me know, right? Because constructive criticism we can always work with and work from. So now that we're past that, today's episode is on whether Pilates can heal a diastasis recti. So let's start with just defining what a diastasis recti is. Some folks pronounce it diastasis. Some folks just say DR. Some folks just call it an abdominal separation. But a diastasis recti is a separation of the rectus abdominis muscle down the center line where the rectus joins together to form a little girdle in the front. And that line where it joins is called the linea alba. And diastasis recti typically happens with women during pregnancy because obviously your abdominal muscles are getting very overstretched during pregnancy, and they can, in fact, separate in the front. Now, lately I've seen a lot of posts in different Pilates teacher Facebook groups asking about how long it takes to heal or fix a diastasis recti or a separation after pregnancy. And that's why I decided today to give you a little more of a deep dive into this topic. Now, before I started focusing a little bit more on the chronic pain and osteoporosis for women over 50, I taught a lot of pre- and postnatal Pilates and a lot of women with diastasis recti. So most women who have a diastasis recti cannot afford to get it fixed. The only way to perfectly heal that kind of separation at the linea alba is to go in and sew it back together, okay, and bring those two sides of the abdominals back into the center. However, at least here in the U.S., and I'm pretty sure it's this way in the majority of the world, especially in countries with national health, diastasis recti is actually considered part of like the body's cost of pregnancy and of giving birth. So the fixing of the diastasis recti is generally not covered by insurance. So all of the clients I've had who have had their diastasis recti surgically repaired, could afford basically to pay for that themselves and on their own. So know that most women cannot get this repaired, okay? So they're kind of stuck with it and learning how to deal with it and navigate it. So the first question people will typically ask me, and I have a funny story about this, is whether Pilates will heal their diastasis recti or fix their diastasis recti. And my answer is an unequivocal no. It's not going to heal it. It's not going to fix it. However, we can get your abdominals functionally strong enough and the rest of your body and your powerhouse functionally strong enough that you will be able to pull your abdominals up and in, and you will be able to be strong enough to engage in most of your activities of daily living with very little pain or issue. And that is really what Pilates can do for women with diastasis recti. Now, you may also ask, do men get this? Of course they do. Men will often have diastasis recti as a result of being overweight, of carrying the beer belly in the stomach, of exercising inappropriately, of exercising in ways that cause way too much intra-abdominal pressure, of lifting heavy objects when they're not quite pulling themselves in. And a lot of these things, given the right conditions, can also cause an abdominal separation and the diastasis recti. But for the majority of people who I have seen with a diastasis, women, specifically women after having twins or having had multiple children. Now, as you know, if you've been listening to my podcast at all, or in any of my Facebook groups or anywhere, you know that the abdominal muscles wrap around the body. They wrap around the body from the spine all the way around to the front at the linea alba. There are multiple layers of abdominal muscle, 4, in fact, So you have the transversus abdominis, which striates horizontally, okay, which runs from your spine all the way around to the front, attaches at the diaphragm, at the rib cage, and at the bottom to the pelvis and toward the pelvic floor muscle. Over that, we have internal obliques. Over that, we have external obliques, and these are the diagonal muscles that allow us to rotate. And over the top of all of those in the front, we have the rectus abdominis, which is kind of like the armor shield of muscle. It is the six-pack that people talk about when they talk about, seeing abdominal muscles. And the rectus abdominis is also a very protective muscle. It pretty much controls trunk flexion, which means rounding your body or bringing your head and your chest closer to your tailbone. And it protects the contents of your abdomen. So, for example, if you are getting punched in the gut and you can contract your rectus abdominis, it's going to help protect your body from internal damage from that punch or that kick. The rectus abdominis muscle also helps hold our torsos steady and stable and works with the other abdominal muscles and the muscles in our backs and around our torsos to keep our torsos steady and stable for things like squats and deadlifts and, things where we don't want to necessarily change spine position. So if you have a separation of the rectus abdominis at the linea alba, the issue there is that the rest of the muscles underneath are also going to be affected by that, okay? The back muscles are going to be affected by this a lot, as are the pelvic floor muscles and the diaphragm, and therefore all the muscles around the rib cage. So what you're going to see a lot with clients with diastasis recti is you're going to see a lot of tucking under of the pelvis in an attempt to just hold the contents of the abdomen in. Imagine that you've got a bunch of groceries and you've got them in one of the old plastic handle bags that, are like illegal in New York now. And, sometimes one side of that bag will split or it will overstretch. It happens in trash bags as well. And that side of the bag is just a little bit weaker. That's essentially what's happening in your torso with a diastasis recti. What are the signs that somebody has a diastasis recti? Well, you'll sometimes just see the obvious separation of the abdominals. And if you don't see it when somebody's just in a lengthened kind of neutral spine or neutral pelvis position, you will see it if you lay them on their backs and put them into some flexion. So any position that's going to increase the pressure down into their abdominals are not going to be able to engage to handle that. So what you will literally see is like a little mountain peak. You'll see a little peak of muscle coming up that cannot be pulled in. And that is the tissue underneath pushing up through the linea alba in the center, okay? So the first thing that you're going to take away from somebody with diastasis recti is you're going to take away those positions where you're severely increasing intra-abdominal pressure. What are those positions? Those are positions of flexion. So we're talking no crunches, we're talking no head up for the 100, we're talking, a lot of the same modifications actually as for osteoporosis, which is interesting. We're also looking at no overhead pressing, especially overhead pressing of heavy weight. And you also want to look, at least at the beginning, at limiting prone exercises, right? Doing some of the back strengthening work and standing, maybe on all fours, And also being really, really careful about things like planks, where the contents of the abdomen are pushing forward, and then you're trying to pull in your powerhouse muscles to hold yourself steady and stable. Again, if a whole section of the powerhouse muscles is overstretched and separated, it's not going to help strengthen anything to keep putting yourself back in that same position where things are pushing out. So realistically, for a woman with diastasis recti, and now I'm going to get to my kind of funny story, you really want to start working in as close to neutral pelvis as you can. You want to be doing a lot of work of pulling up and in with the pelvic floor, up and in with the abdominal muscles, thinking consistently about kind of cinching up and in at the waist a little bit, and getting some good deep breaths into the rib cage to start the process of the diaphragm moving, okay? In fact, you sometimes even want to think a little more about an anterior tilt than a posterior tilt for the pelvis. Number one, because the client is often locked into a posterior pelvic tilt just to try to hold themselves together in the front, which then can lead to, as we know, some extra pressure into the lower back, can lead to pelvic floor issues, can lead to leaking urine, and a whole host of other problems. So several years ago, when I was still teaching full-time in a studio, I got a consult request from a client online. And when I got on the phone with her, she was telling me that, you know, she was an attorney living in Brooklyn and had two lovely girls, had been kind of dealing with this diastasis recti situation for a few years, was having back pain, was still leaking a little bit of urine when she was doing, you know, like a jump squat or something in a different class. And the first thing that she asked me was, can you fix my diastasis? Can doing Pilates with you heal my diastasis? And I said, no, I can't. But what I can do is strengthen you and teach you how to really hold yourself and pull your muscles in so that you can be functionally strong. But you're always still going to have that little bit of diastasis recti that you're going to have to, you know, just live with. And apparently I was the only teacher who didn't basically bullshit her and tell her that, you know, I could heal her diastasis. I want you to know that fast forwarding like 6 or 7 months later, this same client went to a, you know, A-list movie premiere in a gorgeous mummy dress and felt perfectly fine because she was so engaged and so pulled in and up and could breathe and could do all the things, and she looked and felt great. And, you know, for me, I don't care so much how my clients look unless they really do. But I do care about how they feel and how they function. Yeah. And this woman was able to feel and function at her best. And that's kind of what I want for all clients. So if you are working with clients with diastasis recti, you can't just go through the standard Pilates work in the standard way and think that those muscles are just going to pull together. Also, if you're working with clients who are pregnant, because I'm going to tell you right now that for some of the clients who I have seen in studio with diastasis recti, I have been able in the same studio to go through their back records and look at what their Pilates teachers during their pregnancies were giving them for exercises. And I had some clients who had severe diastasis recti while they were pregnant and coming into the studio, they were being given the 100. They were doing backstroke and teaser on the reformer. And these are simply not appropriate exercises for somebody who is in their second or third trimester of pregnancy. Think about it. Your joints are hypermobile to begin with because all that relaxin is starting to course through the system to enable the spreading of all the bones to allow the baby to pass through. Okay? And if somebody's belly is pushing out because there's something growing in there, the last thing that you want to do is try to contract the abdominal muscle over that. All that will do is help them separate and help them overstretch. So essentially, I was kind of looking at these old client cards from these clients and thinking, of course, these people had diastasis recti because they shouldn't have been doing some of these exercises while they were in their second and third trimester of pregnancy. Now, once the abdominal muscles are weakened in some spot around the body, again, it's going to cause tension and tightness in other places. So if you've got a separation in the front of the abdominals, I can guarantee you that someone's back is going to be a lot tighter, right? If you've got separation in the lower abdominals, I can guarantee you that the neck and shoulders are going to be a lot tighter. If someone's got the separation in their abdominals, I can almost guarantee that they're going to have some issues with breathing, with moving their ribs, and especially front and back space. And they might have some issues with their pelvic floor, with not leaking urine, with all of these things. So the way you handle this is by modification, okay? It's by starting with people on their backs, keeping their heads down, okay? Working with strengthening exercises that will work us in a neutral pelvis and going through flexion and extension as tolerated, avoiding most positions of extremely strong intra-abdominal pressure, which again is going to be going into spine flexion, torso flexion, and flexion and rotation, if you think about it, is going to almost be the worst thing, right? Because you've got separated, overstretched abdominals, and then you're flexing them, which is kind of pushing them out, and then rotating on top of them. If you did that with a trash bag that had a lot of heavy stuff in it, that trash bag would probably break. Okay, I want you, this is the image that I want you to have. So when you're working with clients with diastasis recti, you are going to try to work them in positions at the beginning of minimal abdominal pressure and then slowly build them into positions of more and more abdominal pressure. Some great exercises to start with for really men or women with diastasis recti, but I'm going to talk about women because that's mostly who I work with. Some of the best exercises that you can do at the beginning, if you're in a studio, you want to do things like footwork, you want to do things like seated work on the chair. If you're doing any kind of torso flexion, maybe you're doing it on the Cadillac or spring wall where you've got some assistance and a closed kinetic chain for coming up and down. You know, there are ways to handle that. Another great position is on all fours, going through a little bit of cat-cow because you're working against gravity, so the load is very different through the abdominals and with intra-abdominal pressure, of just holding a nice straight spine with a neutral pelvis and open collarbones and just working on breathing and trying to pull the abdominal muscles in and up. Working on full torso, pelvic floor breathing can be very helpful as well. Sitting up tall, maybe sitting on a ball or a chair where they can lean the hip bones a little forward. So they might be in a tiny bit of an anterior pelvic tilt, which can be helpful for the pelvic floor here. And then working on full breathing and really pulling up and in through the pelvic floor muscles to assist the exhale. Trying to allow the rib cage to move and everything to work together on the inhale and the exhale can be very useful here. So there are a number of things that clients can do on their own, in the studio, wherever they are, that will help the strengthening process. Now, you may be sitting there going, but Lynda, how are they going to get stronger if we're not taking them through those full movements and those through exercises? So what you're going to do is you're going to keep checking them. You're going to keep testing them, right? If they've been with you for a little while, maybe, 3 or 4 sessions in, you're going to say, hey, can you curl your head up and maybe curl your upper back up to your shoulder blades and keep pulling your abdominals in and up, and you're going to see if they can get into that position without the peak happening and the pushing out and the bulging out at the diastasis recti, okay, at the linea alba. If they can, then maybe you're going to start working them there a little bit, especially in things like single leg stretch, where they're holding on to their limbs with their arms so they have a little more support and can work on having that heavy sacrum and pulling in and up through their abdominal muscles. But to take somebody into those exercises who is not able to just curl their upper body up without their everything shoving up through that separation is just going to be a recipe for disaster. Okay, they're not going to feel any better. I'm going to leave you with one final story. So I had a client, again, for many years, who had a pretty severe diastasis recti. She was a runner, and she had twins. She wasn't a very large woman to begin with. She continued running through her pregnancies and ended up with a diastasis recti pretty severe. And before she came to see me, she actually called a different studio in the East Village, I believe, somewhere on the Lower East Side. And she said to them, I had my baby several years ago. I've been dealing with this. Can you help me? And they said, oh, of course, our teachers know all about teaching with this condition. Fine. Come on in. And she went in for her first Pilates session, and the teacher that she was with had no idea what a diastasis recti was. And she was horrified, and she left. And then she went online and did some Googling and found me. But make sure that when you're talking to your clients, you're telling them things that you can actually do for them. Okay? And that you really do know what you're doing. Because if you don't, you really can make things worse. And even if they don't get worse, they're certainly not going to get any better. So, know that if you are working with clients who come in or postnatal, have the diastasis recti, have the separation, get yourself a little bit of training. I have some online workshops on teaching clients with diastasis recti and hernia on mat and apparatus. I will put links to those workshops in the show notes. There's also a number of people who have been on the podcast already as guests who can help you understand. Allison Marsh from Pregnancy Pilates Impact is fabulous. And, get some education around this and then work with those clients when you can help them. But, these are times where I've talked before on the podcast how it's important to refer out when you don't know what you're doing, how it's important for your clients to know that you care about them enough, that you are not going to put them into a position to hurt themselves. So that's it for me, guys. I hope that you enjoyed that. I hope that that was useful for you. And I hope that you have a great rest of your day. So I'm currently at, I think this is my 51st episode, and I'm close to 7,000 downloads. And I just wanted to once again thank all of you who listen, who subscribe. And if you can, please go over to the Apple Podcast app or to Podchaser. The links are in my show notes. And leave a rating and review. And if you're listening on Spotify, you can't leave a written review, but you can leave a rating. And I would love that. So I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Music brought to you by Nerd Salad. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, especially if you liked it. And please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks.